All right, welcome everybody to another episode of our Puget Systems podcast live Q&A show. This week, as a part of our little potpourri of guests, we have DJ Bailey, a technology consultant here at Puget Systems. And I don't know if I highlighted this the last time when I had Jared on. He's another member of our consultant team. I don't know that I highlighted this, but we deliberately do not call you guys sales.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important to highlight because that's not what you really do, right? You aren't there to sell stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'd like, since you're the one who's knee deep in it, I'd like you to kind of give a little bit more of an expansion on the mindset of our consultants and really kind of your idea of what that means like to you and to the company and to customers and that sort of thing. Also,
yeah.
A little introduction for yourself and background and things too.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, as Houston mentioned, I'm DJ Bailey. I'm one of the tech consultants here at Puget Systems. Soon to be actually joining the marketing team. So that's an exciting thing coming up in my life in the next month or so. But currently helping out with the consultants. I've been with Puget Systems for like a year and a half now, I think, is how long it's been. So, it's funny, the consultant name, rather than going with sales, is something that, along with just the way the language is on the website and the way that everybody communicated with myself and the way it looked like they communicated with customers, something that really struck me when I was first looking at joining the Puget team. And I think it's funny with a lot of decisions is many of them get made just as much for the people working here as they are for the business reason and like the presentation to the customer. And the name consultant is a lot about that too. Like you said, about the mindset of what this job actually entails. Because when I'm describing to somebody who has no idea about computers or anything about what I do, and they're like, well, what do you do? It's kind of hard to describe, like, without sounding like I'm just a salesman describing in a quick little elevator pitch, like, oh, well, people who need higher end computers for these heavier workflows like video editing and photo editing and stuff. And we talk to them about those needs and then figure out what their system, it all sounds a little, I don't know. But it's really an important distinction because I used to work in sales for years. I worked at big banks and a couple other types of companies. And there are a lot of companies out there where you get some really weird vibes, some negative feedback sort of things that happen internally, and the sort of things that you're asked to do in terms of trying to make that sale above everything else, and it's not an experience that I ever really want to go back to. And by the time I was looking at Puget Systems as a place to work, I was looking for the exact opposite of that experience in my life, and I was willing to take whatever pay cut was necessary to make it happen. Basically, luckily that wasn't the case, but it's been amazing. So like I mentioned, working as a consultant, the biggest thing is focusing on having that conversation with the customer. And as weird and salesy as this can sound, like developing that relationship and talking to them about what their needs are. And a lot of times, Gino, another consultant that I work with, will mention this a lot of times, but a lot of times there are customers that will write in just saying like, hey, I don't know what's out there. I've got this system now. This is the work that I do. I'm okay. I'm fine now, but or maybe they are having some sort of a hitch in their workflow, and they just don't know if they need a new system for it. And a lot of times that can result in a conversation that leads to us not recommending a new system to them. Sometimes it's like they have a perfectly acceptable system in terms of like their CPU and their RAM and everything else, but they need, say, an updated GPU because it's really old or it's failing or something like that. A lot of times we can make a recommendation just to say, hey, you're good where you're at. You just need this one component, and then they're spending $700-800 for a new graphics card that they can put into their existing system rather than spending several $1,000s on a new system, and that's, for me, that's what it's all about. There's never ever been any pressure in this job from anybody I've interacted with to like get those numbers pumped up, sort of thing. I mean, we're all excited whenever we make new sales because we're getting more customers and stuff, but
of course,
like I said, there's never ever been any pressure for me to make that sale or to not have that lengthy of a conversation if it doesn't result in actually earning money for the company or whatever. And that's the most important piece, I think. And it keeps all of us in line with, what our priorities are across the entire company,
Sure. No, and as the social media guy, I see that as in a response as well, from reviews and comments and things on social media is like, heck, oftentimes you guys will even recommend something that is cheaper,
Right.
or steer a customer towards something that, well, is obviously cheaper, but with the intent of trying to help them get the best that they can.
Yeah, it's
maybe you don't
funny the
need
amount of
that.
times where like you'll it's easy to tell sometimes when you see a quote that comes through get saved if somebody hasn't had a conversation with us yet,
Oh, sure.
that they've just taken every drop down on the configurator and just dialed it up to the most expensive option and then
Oh, yeah.
saved just to kind of. And I think some people are just playing around to see what the highest amount they can see is, but
Sure.
some people genuinely have the impression that like the more money that they throw at the problem, the better it's going to perform. And that's obviously not the case.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that the hard work that the labs team does to kind of test all these things really lets us dive deep into, and start digging into people's work and saying like, hey, this 64 core processor from Threadripper that costs you thousands of dollars all by itself isn't going to be the best use case for something that can only take advantage of 4 or 5 cores anyway. It's just not going to do well for that. So you can, like you said, we can save people a lot of money by dialing those choices back and just letting them know, hey, we've done the testing. Here it is. This is what will work best, and it just happens to be a couple $1,000s cheaper than what you started with. So
right, yeah, which I love that. I think that's part of what kind of warms my heart about the company is like that's not our goal. Isn't always to get the most money out of somebody.
Right.
The intent is always to kind of develop that long. There's a phrase that that kind of stuck with me from an older job of mine was the long-term successful relationship. And that's really the goal is
right.
to have that long-term successful relationship. And I think that's really neat.
Yeah, I mean, it works out for us as a business because we're building trust and building rapport with customers that's genuine, and that pays off in the long run. That people can literally trust in us as a company and the decisions that we choose to make in the parts that we carry and the advice that we give, so that in 5, 6, 7 years time, whenever they're ready for a new system, there's no question who they're coming to for it.
Right. And I want to point out that one of your particular customers is actually in the chat right now. I apologize if I say this wrong. Kieran Estrada is.
I believe that's
DJ,
it.
DJ hooked me up with a great system. Good dude.
Heck yeah!
Right on. That's really neat. I guess we'll touch on what is generally the process for a new customer. Do you find that it's usually somebody who's like created an account on the website and then a quote, and then, or is it more of the phone calls direct or emails direct?
Yeah, so I mean, sometimes it's kind of hard to describe an average day because it can vary a lot, depending on how many meetings I have scheduled that day or how many customer calls have been set up for me or Zoom conferences that I'm setting up with the customer. And like those days can be challenging sometimes because the flow of emails coming in and inquiries coming in and new quotes being saved doesn't really slow down. So if there are days where I have just Zoom meetings with customers back to back to back, a lot of times those can be pretty lengthy because often it's people who I haven't talked to a whole lot other than just kind of setting up the first expectation that they are video editing. But beyond that, they haven't given me a lot of information. And so we have to dive really deep, figure out more information about their specific workflow, talk about the specifics of maybe a couple different systems that might be an option for them, talk about the pros and cons of those different systems and see what's going to work best for their needs. And so it can be kind of a lengthy process. And when you have several of those lined up back to back to back, it can be challenging to find time in the middle of them to get back to your inbox and respond to those emails. So it can be pretty hectic, but then there are other days where I don't have a lot of those meetings scheduled and I can really focus on getting responses back out to people.
Cool.
So that varies a lot, but yeah, that's as far as how those inquiries come in and how customers are reaching us, that can change the way the conversation starts and goes as well. So some people have been following us for years and have found us through videos from Smarter Every Day or from any number of other people that we've kind of put content out with over the years. And A lot of times those conversations are really great because those people have been researching us and in some cases fanboying over us and things like that. And so it's always a fun conversation to have where people understand perfectly the value that we're bringing to the conversation. And it's just a matter of like, a lot of times those conversations end up being like them knowing the answers to the questions they're asking and me just kind of being a sounding board for them to validate those things and get them up to date on the latest hardware and things like that. And those are super easy conversations. But then there's the people that come to us with really zero background, zero knowledge. They may have gotten a recommendation from a friend to talk to us, or they just searched best computer for whatever, and our website came up. And those are fun too, because you get to introduce people to that and answer all their questions and really impress them and wow them with, again, like the level of detail that we've gone into making those decisions for the type of hardware that we choose to carry and stuff like that. So it can be really varied, the types of conversations I have. And a lot of my day can also be spent like doing research for like very specific niche things that I don't have information on.
Yeah, that touches on a good point, because I know that there are certain software packages or even workflows that we don't specifically test, especially when it comes to the big broad content creation. I mean, there's all sorts of things like when it comes to like animation and stuff, there's all kinds of weird different softwares and whatnot. And how that's something I actually have trouble with myself is how do you translate the data and the testing that we have done into something that maybe isn't specific to what the customer is trying to accomplish?
Yeah, happens all the time. A lot of times it happens in the CAD space because there's just a bunch of CAD softwares out there. 3D space is another big one where there's a lot. And like you say, just post-production in general kind of tends to happen as well, because a lot of people are using Avid, for example, is a big one that we don't have specific testing for. We get a lot of inquiries about that still. So those are kind of the three big spaces, but there's stuff all around. I've helped somebody with, there's a program out there called FTK, Forensic Toolkit, and he was literally working for like, I forget if it was like FBI or some other sort of police force or something, but he, his job was to like take hard drives from computers of like suspects on these cases and things and like peel all the data off and parse it through this software. And so anyway, like digging into things like that, it can get really, really complex. But for some of the more normal ones where people have, let's say that they're using Blender, which we don't specifically test for, is a really, really common one. If I'm starting out and I don't have a lot of information on it, the first place that I'll go if I've never heard of the software before is literally just to Google, whatever that software is. And then I tend to Google recommended hardware rather than like specs or minimum requirements or whatever, because that'll tend to point you towards some software developers will have this distinction where there's one site that'll show you the bare minimum requirements. You can get away with using this tiny little, $100 laptop if you wanted to, and you could technically run this thing, but it's not going to be a good time sort of thing. And those are largely useless because those are really trying to give you that bare minimum. You can run this program with this kind of thing. But when the software developers have listed on their website like the recommended specs, and a lot of times there will be tiers that will be like minimum, recommended, top end kind of thing, and that's gold. That's pure gold. And we find that stuff, and especially when it's up to date, we tend to rely pretty heavily on that, combined with information that our labs team has used for softwares we do test for. So Cinema 4D, and Unreal Engine, and a number of them I'm not thinking of right now, but we take a lot of those and the exposure that the labs team has and that personally I have talking to people that are doing this type of work on a regular basis and checking in on forum posts and things like that. And you start to see the patterns and where those things can differ. And just over time, you start to remember and just be aware of how hardware can be utilized differently in Blender compared to these other softwares. And a lot of it comes down to what the customer is doing, honestly, so that the type of workflow for Unreal, for example, can be used for just a ridiculous amount of things. There's no uniform workflow that somebody could be using when they're using that piece of software. So talking to the customer and having them describe to me what it is that they're doing is a big thing. And then another really great piece of information is getting what the customer's current system is. That is an invaluable piece of information, because a lot of times, like, if somebody's never had more than a laptop from 2010 and they're upgrading now to a desktop from us on the high end in today's money. Like that's we still want to have that thorough conversation, but it makes it a lot easier of a conversation sometimes, especially if they have a limited budget, because even our lowest end offering is going to be like 10x the performance in a lot of cases compared to what they're used to, and so like and it's going to open up a lot of doors for them to be able to do things they probably weren't even doing before, just because their system wasn't even capable of going into that. And so those can, in a lot of ways, be easier. But we also want to make sure, I don't want to make that sound like we don't do like the research for those people to make sure that they're going to be handled with what they're trying to do. But it can be tough sometimes, because if you have limited information, if they have limited information that they're able to provide for what they even want to accomplish, it can be a little more challenging to give advice on like, okay, well, this is how much hardware you need in this area or that area. If they don't know what they want to do, it's kind of tough. We tend to err on the side of caution there. We go with systems that are going to be, have a decent amount of cores on the CPU, for example, but also be nice, fast clock speeds without going super overboard and making them pay for a system that they may never end up using all those cores, kind of thing. So we land in the consumer space a lot of times with situations like that, with like Ryzen 7, Ryzen 9 setups, or Intel Core i7, Core i9 setups. Sorry, I kind of went all over the place on that one.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a nuanced, question and topic, so that's okay. Oh, sorry. I'm fiddling. I got to keep my hands busy. Otherwise, I space out and I get distracted by other things. So, I'd like to touch on the topic of kind of cost. We've kind of mentioned that we do try to save customer money when we can. But even still, our systems are very high end. We don't sell i3s.
Right.
I don't even know that we carry i5s anymore. Nope. Can you shed some light onto maybe the why behind that?
Yeah, that's a nuanced topic too.
Sure, I should say, because I know people have come, and I know you probably get questions all the time, like, "Hey, I have $1,500 budget. What can you do for me?"
Yeah,
and that's got to be tough.
Yeah, it's a challenging conversation to have for sure. We still do our best to try and help customers like that, but there are so many decisions that go into the why behind that there's no one thing I could even point to. I think the biggest thing is that we have now, our company has evolved over the last few years from, what was it, 6-7 years ago, we were heavy focused on the gaming industry. That was our primary target audience was people buying gaming systems. But we had kind of identified a need, a place where there wasn't information out there that was easily accessible, and that's in this space that we're working in now, primarily this post-production space, this more professional workflow. A lot of people, especially in post-production, had turned to Apple for filling that need.
Apple, yeah.
And I think that was just kind of the de facto choice for a long time, just because it was a high-end system, it costs a lot, and they did a really good job at marketing, to be honest, towards people like that. But there wasn't any like real dedicated company out there that was doing this testing dedicatedly focused on like, okay, we're going to put A and B tests together for these different systems and figure out which of these processors performs better in this month's version of Premiere Pro that's out right now, kind of thing. And so like, along with identifying that need and, seeing people that really wanted to have that information available, it was also opportunity to kind of grow our audience, that we were working with. And so I know that's not a great answer, but like that's as we started moving into that, some more of our resources, more of our labs time, and the people that do all of that testing and spend all that time getting all that information, for us, are spending that time on researching those things. If you start looking at those lower end things, there's a huge, the price difference between them for buying an i3 with the same setup basically versus buying an i7 or an i9 with the same setup is not so great that it's worth even really digging into in a lot of cases. It's just that the price gap between those two processors is small enough that the performance jump is big enough that it just makes sense to go that route. And so when we've got all these resources and this testing built around kind of identifying those needs and testing for them, it's tough to justify, having those lower end things. I think that's the biggest part of it.
Sure. I want to touch on this question from Twitch actually, but the asker is AFK at the moment, but that's okay. Game Trailer on Twitch asks if you can't do a build on a caller's budget, do you still offer some advice
on a baller's budget? I assume is what he meant.
Oh, like I think callers, like somebody calling in, like again, if somebody's like, hey, I have X budget, and the lowest end system we can do is more than that.
Right.
How do you handle that?
Yeah, so I think I think you're going to find a bit of a variance depending on who you talk to that day, and honestly, even a variance in my own personal self. If you reach out to me, if I'm knee deep in a bunch of meetings and stuff that day, I might not have time to get as quick a response as I'd like to somebody who I've already had a conversation with, and they say I've got $1,000 to buy a system. That's a tough conversation to have. At the very least, I mean, we don't treat those people who write into us or call into us any differently than somebody who is a legitimate interest in purchasing a system from us, especially if it's a phone call. Like, phone calls are top priority for us to pick up in the consulting department. And so getting their initial questions answered so that they have enough information to make a decision at the very least is going to be baseline no matter who you talk to, email or phone. It's going to be, hey, listen, our literally our minimum price point for a system is like $2,600 or something like that. That's going to be over what you're working with. Unfortunately, we're not able to help you. Here's a couple companies that we've worked with before or that we've sent people to before who've had positive experiences, and they probably have something in your budget, sort of thing. And so that's bare minimum. That's going to be the expectation of the advice that you would get, is for us to sort of point you in the right direction. When I have time, I really like to go above and beyond for people in that regard. I tend to try and talk to people more about what they're trying to do, and try and get them more specific information. So I've done a lot of research on like different laptops and things like that. And a lot of people write in asking for laptops because we used to do those as well. So that's a big thing. And top of budget, it's laptops. So when I have the time, I really like to keep myself knowledgeable and up to date on what the offerings from other companies are out there, so that people don't end up in a situation where we won't name any names, but if they end up with a company that isn't as great with the customer service side of things, or they've got a bunch of bloatware that they have installed on their systems and things like that, and they're going to end up with a system that, even if it's decent hardware, which isn't a guarantee with certain companies out there, it's going to be so bogged down with bloatware and be such a poor negative service experience that they're going to feel like they wasted their money at the end of the day. That's the biggest thing I want to avoid people jumping into. Even if it's not buying a system from us, I want to point them in directions that they're going to be happy with their purchase and supported by that company.
I love to hear that. I like, again, in the past of my own experiences, worked for a company where we would get questions about things that the company didn't do, and it's like, well, we don't do that, but I know somebody who does. Yeah, and I always felt that was kind of cool. It's like it's not just a closed door,
Not at all. Yeah, it never is. And I sometimes I'll even tell people up front, like, hey, I may not have time to respond to you today, but I wanted to get a quick little ping out to you just to let you know, like, hey, we don't have a system that's within your budget. I'm happy to continue this conversation, but I've got a lot of things on my plate today. I might get a response out to you tomorrow, kind of thing. And most people really understand that and are appreciative of it. And those conversations tend to go on for a couple days usually, where I just kind of pass back and forth with making recommendations and refining things, and then they'll go find something for them. But
yeah, that's cool. You have another fan also, this one from Facebook. Michael Dalnute says, DJ is my guy.
I remember Michael.
Is it Curaçao or Curacao?
Curacao, I think.
Curacao, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so that's fun. Hey, I like have fans. That's super cool. I come from production. My background is from assembly and stuff, and so I know some of the cooler clients that we've had, without naming names, of course, because we're very strict on who we talk about and things like that, clients and whatnot. I'd like to more focus on like what they do. But which ones what client or clients stand out to you as cool, interesting, maybe a bit of a challenge, that sort of thing?
Yeah. For as far as interesting interactions, I think my answer will vary a little bit from what you might find from the other consultants. I think a lot of them do like the idea of like name dropping, like, oh, I talked to somebody in Hollywood the other day and they said they were going to put my name in a movie or something. Cool stuff like that. But, for me, I mean, that stuff is cool. But I don't tend to get super starstruck. Certainly there'd be some people I'd probably be super starstruck if I had a chance to talk to them. But, for me, I would say like the times when I get most excited, I kind of alluded to earlier. It's those conversations where people come to us because they have known about us for years. They might have gotten referred to us from somebody else, and they've been keeping track of us. Because those conversations tend to be so easy and go so well that it just leaves like. It just leaves me feeling really, really pleased at the end of those conversations, because those customers like already know what they want, and they might be still as thoughtful in asking all these questions, but again, all the questions like they already halfway know the answer to, and they're just trying to cross validate when they're talking to me. So that tends to be what gets me the most excited. I don't know, in terms of like exciting interactions, learning new stuff is time consuming as it can be. Like learning new stuff or clients who come to me with something that I've never dealt with before is still pretty exciting for me. When I get to do sort of the research part of the job, and in some cases we've even, and again, this is one we don't always have time to dig super deep into, but when I've got time, and especially if there's not a lot of information available online for some software we don't test for, sometimes what I'll do is send a ping out to like the support team at that software developer, for example. It tends to be a really great resource, and they can usually get me in contact. Like if I send just kind of a nice, genuine message out that says, hey, I've got this customer, like this is who we are, and they're trying to configure a system that's ideal for this. I couldn't find anything on your guys' site that talks about the type of hardware that might be ideal. Do you have somebody there on the team that could speak to that with me, or give me some advice? And that tends up being pretty fruitful a lot of the time. To get information from that, and then I can pass that along to the customer to sort of help make a decision. So interactions like that, although they could be more time consuming, are some of the more exciting ones for me, rather than just sort of like the day in and day out ones, because it breaks up the monotony. So
yeah, well, that's kind of cool. Right on. I'm curious too about I guess after the sale. I don't know that I've really talked about this at all before, but what does that look like? Like, okay, Tom, he's got his Premiere machine.
Right.
What sort of like after sale sort of interactions are there?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we, like we've talked about, the whole goal with the consultant experience from beginning to end, is trying to build this relationship with the customer, and that's not a falsehood, that's not a lie that we're telling to try and make more sales. And so in a lot of ways we've tried to set ourselves up to be the continuous touch point for a customer, even after that sale happens. So obviously, especially right now with kind of extended build times, we try and stay in contact with the customer on a regular basis, just to make sure they don't feel like they've been forgotten, or that somehow their system isn't in queue anymore or something like that. And so those are pieces of it, and we get some responses back from that of people just saying thank you. And sometimes people have questions or want to change their config partway through, which is great that we have a chance to kind of like spark that thought in them before it's too late. And so that's always really nice. But and then after, like once somebody's received their system, we also send an email out. It's just sort of like a final checkup, like, hey, looks like your system got delivered. You've had it for a while. Hopefully you've had a chance to set it up and see how it's going. How's everything going, basically? And then we also, I'm sure you know this because you get some stuff back from this, but like we also ask those customers in that email if they'd be comfortable sending along anything, whether it's photos or just kind of like things like information about what they're doing with their system, and just kind of exciting stuff, because we want to continue that relationship and that contact with a customer, and let them know like we're not just making it so we care about what you're doing, we're excited about that kind of thing. And so we get a lot of awesome stuff back from people there that gets posted on social sometimes and things like that. So that's a lot of fun. But also those emails tend to garner a lot of results of people who might have been experiencing like a little glitch or some issue with their system whenever they first got it, or maybe just trouble getting it set up for the first time. And that's also an opportunity in a lot of cases. I mean, if it's a small thing, something simple that we can figure out or already know the answer to, I can quickly fire off a response back to that customer and get them taken care of right away. Nice. But if I don't, then that provides a really good opportunity for me to do more of like a warm transfer to somebody on the support team, rather than them just like, they don't know what to expect. They've never had to call into support before. This is the first time they've gotten their system, and they're just calling into a number, not really knowing what sort of experience they're going to get. Instead, I can forward that email on to the support team, copying the customer back and say like, hey, I sent this along to the support team. They're going to create a ticket and they're going to respond back to you, and they're going to get started on trying to help you figure out what's going on. So it just, again, it makes for a lot nicer of an experience for people to have that same person that they've already been developing that relationship with, continue on that conversation with them, and get them transferred over to the support team, basically, to keep that going. So
nice. That's cool. Oh, and I think it was before the stream you had mentioned that you had a little bit of crossover with support in that way, and so it's cool to know that you can kind of bridge that gap a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I until very recently, actually, and this is kind of tied in with the marketing move I talked about a little earlier, but I'd spent 1 day every 2 weeks on Wednesdays. I would go in and help out the support team, and so especially myself and actually a couple other people on the consultants team as well that do a similar thing where they're cross trained in other departments and things. We'll have a little more support experience, and so like when customers do write in there, it provides us a little more access to be able to know the answer to the question that they have, if they're having a support issue. So that's great. But sometimes, like, again, it's kind of a time management thing can be difficult. Like, even if I do know the answer to a question, or if I know the steps that need to be taken to try and start diagnosing it, especially if I know it's going to be a lengthier process where we have to do some back and forth figuring it out, like I'll still pass that along to the support team typically and hand that off, just because that can be hours of work sometimes, trying to get somebody set back up. And so,
yeah. Is there a particular, again, without naming names, of course, but I'm curious of a particularly challenging either workflow, software, client configuration, those sorts of things that may stand out to you?
Sure. Some of the more difficult interactions that I have in general tend to be like and again, it comes back to this thing I keep talking. I feel like I'm harping on it now, but like the time management part is pretty challenging. And so like some of the more difficult interactions are when I have to remind myself when to actually say no to somebody. I have difficulty saying no. I like going above and beyond. I like doing all that research and like doing all that extra, but at a certain point, like let's say I've got a customer who's been on with me for 2.5 hours of my 8-hour workday. That's at that point, it's not fair to the other customers that I have waiting on responses for me to take that much time, and that's happened, and so like a lot of customers are actually really, really good about that, where they're like, if they set up a time with me that's 15-minute block or a 30-minute block or an hour or whatever, they're really aware of that and respectful of that time. And like towards the end of that time period, they're like, hey, we're coming up against this timeline. And sometimes if I don't have a meeting after, I'll let that conversation. I'll just say, hey, I've got nothing after this. Let's keep going. We're in a good spot. And so those are really great for me. But then the more difficult ones is when I have to like get to the point where I'm like trying to figure out a kind way to wrap things up or say that we need to follow up later, sort of thing, because I do have to get to other things. That's probably one of the more challenging parts of my job, I would say. And then one of the other more difficult ones you've already also broached, which is when we don't have information for somebody, and I can't, like, if I've exhausted all my resources in trying to research and figure something out for somebody, and I come up shy, and I just have to tell somebody like, I don't like. That's another thing that's really hard for people to say, like, I don't know. I'm never afraid to say I don't know, and like I pride myself in a lot of cases of being really upfront and honest with people and saying like, this is the bounds of what I know, this is what I think, and from there we kind of have to do either additional research or just extrapolation of the information we have, the more challenging conversations come when it's a use case that's so unique and out there that there's no information really to be found as far as I can find, and I just have to say like, I don't know, like we have to go off of this information we have available. Here's some systems that have worked there before. So that's
fingers crossed, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. That's a tough one. But it also, the thing I kind of tell myself in those interactions is that there's not really, unless there's like a specific company set up that sells those exact type of systems, which there are, industries that work that way as well sometimes. But unless it's a situation like that, like it's not like those customers really have any other resource to turn to that's going to be able to aggregate that information for them. And so like I still feel like, I go as far as I can possibly go to reasonably research that information and give them the best course of action that they have, which is still more than what, your off the shelf customer is going to get if they go to Best Buy and pick something up, they're just kind of guessing that's going to work for them at that point. So,
right.
Yeah.
All right. I'd like to, we'll talk forward thinking. So you mentioned like Unreal and people doing some crazy stuff. It's not just video games anymore. I mean, there's all kinds of CAD stuff going on. We touch on, and so just in case the audience isn't aware, we touch on content creation, engineering, and scientific computing tend to be the kind of big buckets that we focus on. I'm curious what you're most excited about in the future, like coming soon or even further looking forward. What gets you jazzed up?
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I think the idea of the amount of processing power we have available as desktops being more mobile is something that's kind of exciting. And I think there's a lot of that happening. And then definitely things something I've been thinking a lot about lately is some of the failed attempts at like Google Glass, for example, other like sort of AR things. And I can't wait. I feel like we're on the cusp of having that sort of technology available. And the amount of things that I think about sometimes randomly in the day that would just be so cool if there could be like an AR overlay where I could still see the world around me, not be completely closed off like with VR goggles, but have an AR overlay or something like on glasses, even if they look super dorky or something. Right. I would buy the heck out of that.
I know. So that's funny you mentioned Google Glass. I'm often disappointed that Google will put a lot of effort initially into a cool idea and then it just like disappears. Google Glass being in particular. And especially, and I'm with you there. The AR, I think AR will be the next kind of big thing. There's rumors circulating that Apple is working on glasses. Apple glasses, yeah. And since Google abandoned their project, I feel like they're going to be the next logical people who could execute on something that is going to be stylish. Like Apple's industrial design is intense.
They're not going to make something that looks like junk,
and then also will function well. I think it's going to be because it is of course a when, not an if. It's going to be amazing. I think that would be. I want that Terminator vision too. I want the thing where I look at a restaurant and it's got the menu popped up or like the reviews or something, or my Google Maps will just paint a line on the road. In front of me.
Yeah, there are definitely some aspects of that I'm not excited about. Thinking about like all the ad revenue that's going to have to be built into a product like that. It's going to be frustrating, I'm sure. But especially like once the technology gets out there and you get, more of the open source communities, I'm sure going to be developing things that are going to go along with that may make it a little more free of ads and things like that. I'll definitely be diving headlong into that sort of thing.
Yeah. I'm particularly excited too about Unreal. And the things that people are leveraging with that. I mean, it was amazing, 10 years ago when people were doing red versus blue, machinima stuff. And now, wow. Oh man,
it's come a long way.
I mean, virtual production, I think is just mind blowing. It's so cool to.
Yeah. If you want to talk about one of the industries that's growing largest in terms of like the number of inquiries that we're getting in, that's probably it. Is people inquiring about Unreal Engine or just virtual production in general, calling in to ask. And like you said, there's so many different industries that tie into that. Like the architecture industry, there's a lot of people that want to have that VR goggles walk through sort of experience for people. And they can set up like a model of like a new house construction or something that they're making, and they want to be able to do that. And there's some people on YouTube that is a big thing we've been getting a lot of inquiries about, is that this real-time rendering is a big thing that people have been asking about a lot lately. And that sort of differs from like a normal like render out a scene sort of layout, in that you build it, you model it, and then you render it out. Whereas with the real-time rendering, obviously the idea is that like it's in real time, you're literally rendering it out as people are like walking through the space or like scrolling through it or whatever you want to do. And so like that was another one that was interesting that I didn't have a lot of experience or exposure to, that I had to get some information from. And luckily I had Kelly to turn to in the labs team that was kind of a good source of information there. But I guess the trick of that is doing a lot of pre-render work still. Basically, is what it comes down to. So you have to kind of layer in and light bake ahead of time and get all that data set up so that it's basically just a scene that you can walk through easily. But and then you have to have a pretty big GPU with a lot of VRAM still. If you want it in high detail.
You got to hold that stuff. Well, it's real time, so it's got to be live.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
That
but
makes
no,
sense.
that's exciting stuff. I think that would be, I mean, really cool to see super high resolution, high detail sort of renders that people have and be able to walk through it with VR goggles. That would be pretty awesome. So yeah, there's just, and I mean, beyond that, there's just so many other things that a lot of people doing like LED walls, Mandalorian style that are inquiring into to sort of do that stuff. Those things tend to be pretty expensive inquiries,
Sure,
because
sure.
people doing productions like that need multitudes of systems
Oh
doing
man.
different tasks in Unreal at the same time,
Yeah.
and lots of GPUs, lots of Quadros, typically with sync cards to try and get all those screens to be matched up and frame locked, and yeah, very expensive. So
That's cool. I'm looking forward to seeing how some, especially when the LED wall thing might end up getting kind of hacked, I guess, in a way,
mm,
because we have some fairly powerful graphics cards these days with multiple outputs, and we have
right.
some really really large televisions and monitors and things. So I'm curious to see how some people may kind of fake it in a way,
Mm,
because it didn't have to be like the Mandalorian. You've seen those behind the scenes shots where it's like
right.
it's a massive thing.
Mm,
I'm curious, like behind me, if I had a big 120-inch or a projector or something behind me,
sure.
I wonder how well, I mean, I have a 1080 Ti, so it's probably not going to be that great, but I just feel like it could be because it seems to be, you have this kind of this big gap. You have,
Mm,
the Mandalorian sort of volumes, these
mm,
LED wall volumes, and then there's
yeah.
there's the folk who are like Matt Workman and things like that, who are
Yeah.
doing green screen virtual
Right.
production, where
Yep.
it's you paying up a bunch of green sheets in your garage and then paint in, and now you're walking around in Fallout or something. And
Yeah.
so I feel like as these two things, economies of scale and whatnot, there's going to be a convergence. I feel like, where the technology for the walls are going to get cheaper, and
Mm,
also like the fidelity for like rotoscoping you out of a green screen and whatnot are going
sure.
to get better too.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's for me, it's always kind of a hard thing. I don't like to act like I know more than I do, and
Sure.
it's
No,
tough
no.
to speak on those sort of topics because there's so many moving parts
Oh
to
yeah.
what direction that sort of thing is going to end up landing, and like there's so many market pressures too that are going to impact it, even despite what the best way of doing it would be or the best technology available for using it. That may end up going a completely different direction just because of a different way being less expensive to manage, sort of thing. So.
It's exciting. I love seeing these advancements and stuff in this
Mhm.
different. Uh, it always seems like it's like lowering the barrier to entry. I think is
Yeah.
is super exciting. So there's so much you can do um, with some fairly cheap, I guess. I don't want to.
Mm.
I feel like that kind of puts a weird spin on things, but it's just a lot easier to do some really amazing things than, and it's only just been in the last few years, like very
Right.
short amount of time. We've made some incredibly huge advancements. It's really
Yeah.
really fun.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it's just like the software tools that have been made more readily available and usable to people,
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, game trailer would like you to know that it's okay. You can be bloated and boast.
Bloated.
That's what he said. Yeah, man, it's super cool. Is there so outside of work? Let's talk about. Is there anything that you're really interested in or excited about outside of content creation and engineering and that kind of a thing? In some.
Hmm. I'm excited. Hopefully, fingers crossed. In a few months, maybe I don't know what the timeline's going to look like for COVID restrictions to start lessening.
Sure, sure.
If we finally get over that hump and get herd immunity, whatever that means, like I'm really excited to go out and be able to do normal things and live like a normal human again.
Yeah,
I'm tired of the inside of my house,
sure.
to be quite frank. But yeah, apart from that, I don't know. Like
No. Any cool technology you're hyped for or anything like that?
man, I'm trying to think. Nothing new that really sparks my interest per se.
Sure.
I tend to be the kind of person with any kind of purchases. I tend to be the kind of person that'll hold off on buying anything new until it's had a chance to not only develop first of all and maybe iterate on itself a little more, but also I don't tend to be too spendy on new things for myself personally. But so after a few years, it tends to lower in cost and be more affordable rather than
Sure.
being on the bleeding edge. But
Yeah.
um,
Huh?
I know I'm a horrible guest. I don't have
Oh,
any.
no. It's
I
fine.
don't have any
It's
fun
fine.
things to talk about.
I'm curious too. So AMD recently, the last, I don't know, man, 6 years, they have really been the comeback kid. When I first started working at Puget, it was only just maybe a few months into my tenure where the first like Ryzen stuff really released.
Yeah.
And they've only just made better and better and better advancements in the CPU space. I'm curious of your thoughts on whether or not they're ever going to catch up on graphics cards.
That's a good topic. Yeah, actually there's some contention, I think, in the ranks in terms of whether or not that's going to be the case. There's definitely some fanboying that goes one way or the other on that topic.
Sure.
I personally, I didn't have a lot of, again, this is like coming back to my personal, not purchasing things for myself very frequently and things. Before I joined on with the Puget team, I didn't have a lot of direct exposure to like a lot of the talk around AMD versus Intel or NVIDIA versus AMD and things like that. And I was really exposed to that over the last couple of years, basically, as I started kind of inundating myself with that information and obviously becoming an expert on a lot of those things. But yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, again, it's one of those where it's like, there's so many variables that can impact, like there's the market pressures and things like that. I mean, they're doing incredible things, and it seems like a lot of those technologies go hand in hand in terms of like the advancements and things. You'd think that there would be similar, things happening on the GPU space compared to the CPU improvements that they've been making. But you got to recognize, obviously, there are different teams of people that are working in those different sectors for different purposes, different focuses, and I think that's from what I've heard anyway. That's probably one of the biggest things, is that in terms of raw performance, I don't know that there's a huge gap there per se. I think it's just a matter of focus and like driver support. And again, this is kind of a less educated opinion on this topic, but from my understanding, it's just a matter of like of driver support for the like, for example, this is some information that I can speak on at least sort of with authority. But when the labs team does testing, because whenever these new products come out, I can't think of a time where we haven't gone and grabbed one of these newer products and at least tested them to see how they're going to perform, because we have to decide whether we're going to carry them or not. And so the labs team will get the new 6800 XT and 6900 XT and test it, or is it just 6900X? I don't know. Anyway, as far as the GPU names, the AMD GPUs, they'll grab them and they'll test them. And so, like, I mean, when they run through those tests, like the TLDR of it for most of the stuff that we test for, we're again talking about the video editing workflows, photo editing workflows, CAD CAM work, machine learning and AI and things like that. Like in a lot of them, with the price points being so similar as they are, like the performance was either on par or less, in a lot of cases less than what NVIDIA was. And not particularly because the raw performance isn't there, but just because like it's just not optimized for work in those sort of spaces, from what I understand. And that's just kind of like it's like reading the TLDR of people who are smarter than me doing all this testing and sort of summarizing it out, that's sort of what the gap is. And so it just doesn't make a lot of sense for us to offer it over NVIDIA when you're talking about the price for the performance you're getting. It just isn't there. So
I feel like NVIDIA really did themselves a huge service by heavily supporting CUDA. It makes it super easy for software developers and stuff to really take advantage of that. Where I think the competitor there is Opencl, I think.
Right. Yep.
And from what I've heard from others, is like that is not as easy to implement and so
optimize for.
Because well, I mean that tends to be what ends up being the gap, at least for what we service. Premiere Pro takes advantage of CUDA for hardware encoding or whatnot, and AMD just doesn't have that available.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Game Trailer says, I mean, you could imagine NVIDIA saying our GPUs go great with AMD CPUs. They wouldn't be able to market that if it wasn't split. Oh, sure. Because they had mentioned before, one of the best things that AMD had done was to officially split the GPU market and CPU market with Radeon. So that makes sense. Intel too, about to get into the GPU market.
I forgot
That's
about
an interesting sort of thing.
So isn't that focused more on like mobile stuff right now? Like, do they have a competitive offering for desktop discrete GPUs currently, or are they working on one?
I do believe that is the plan.
Oh, okay.
Because they've kind of dabbled in this in the past. If and this was years ago. They kind of tried to enter the GPU market a little bit. It didn't work out that well, so they pivoted it into a compute card. The Intel Phi cards were sort of their attempt at a graphics card. But now they seem to be getting back into that. And give me just a moment. What are they calling these things? I do think that they're still targeting more toward like an enterprise solution.
Okay.
But it is a discrete graphics card.
Okay.
And I'm getting a little mixed of my quick little Google search here. But man, there's so many interesting changes going on with Intel entering graphics cards.
Yeah.
Give me just a moment. I think somebody's scratching at my door.
Uh-oh.
Apologize for my unprofessionalism here in the last few minutes. But yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I from what little I've consumed of that content, it sounds like it's a couple thoughts that I have. One, more competition, more players in the space is never going to be a bad thing, in my opinion. When you've got sectors of the market that are split across multiple businesses, it makes the consumer win in most cases, right? And promotes not sitting on your laurels basically as a company and just kind of going with the status quo. So I appreciate that personally, and if Intel can make something competitive, awesome. I am all about it. What I've heard, and again, this might have been, I don't know, a previous round of something that they've done before. I don't really know.
Yeah.
But what I've heard is that basically for competing on the level of like 3070s, 3080s, 3090s versus like 6800 and 6900 and AMD offerings, that this is kind of going to be like a first pass for Intel, where it might not be the most compelling buy, but maybe it'll make sense in a certain market sector. Right. But then this is kind of the way to get their foot in the door, start doing those things more regularly, develop their processes, and be competitive next time around, sort of thing. And again, even then, that's exciting. That's good news, that people have more options to choose from. So
yeah, I agree. I definitely think if they do put out a discrete graphics card to compete directly, at least with AMD and NVIDIA in the consumer market, I definitely agree. I think it will be kind of at that kind of entry level, sort of mid range, maybe. I don't think I feel like it's going to be tough to compete with NVIDIA in the high end 3090 Titan. And then you start getting into like the more professional card like Quadros and stuff like that.
And stuff, yeah.
And
not called Quadros anymore.
Yeah, they're.
What? I think so it's up to this point, it's been Quadro P and K, and then whatever the actual card number is. And so now they've got the A series, but they just dropped the Quadro nomenclature, I guess.
Right.
Which is
because it's Ampere, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it still has that letter and then the number after to indicate which model that you're purchasing, but I guess the Quadro part's been dropped.
But yeah, I don't know. I feel they should have kept it because it's difficult to talk about otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Whenever I'm referencing it, I still call it Quadro, and then I just say, technically it's not Quadro, but here, it's the new version of Quadro.
Yeah. So. Let's see. Actually, I think we were just talking about this game. Trailer asked question for DJ, thoughts on the Intel graphics development, and I think we were just talking about their graphics cards, and then would Puget supply if they are legit? And
so that's we again, no matter what the product is, when we come out with it, like with the lab team is going to get their hands on it if we can, and test it to make sure, like if there's some compelling reason for us to carry it, we're going to carry it, and sometimes, again, it's a situation like the only real competing position that they have is to compete against the lower end on the 3070 sort of vein of things, where if the price is just too close, it might not make sense for us to carry it, even if it's a decent value, right? And a lot of times the articles that we put out when we test things are going to indicate that sort of information. So again, like we have this whole other motive of providing as much information to people as possible, and and then we have the other side of things, which is using that information to mix that with some business decisions that we make on what we choose to carry and things like that to sort of serve the majority of our customers. But especially for people doing their own system builds, or just even if they bought a system from us before and they're doing upgrades to keep that system alive longer, sort of thing, they can delve into those articles to get more information on that kind of thing and make a decision that works for them. So.
Yeah. And I think the best example of us offering the best product that makes sense is our recent pivot to mostly AMD as the core of our offerings. Now, it used to be, just a generation ago, as far as AMD is concerned, the Zen 2 was right about equal with about Intel's offerings, and we tended to kind of lean more toward Intel simply because of just kind of lifespan in the market. Thunderbolt support was a huge one because a lot of our customers move from Mac or have to play in both spaces. And then Zen 3 came out, and it made sense because the performance difference was just so it's just and so
it's a big leap.
Yeah. And I feel because when you play in the technology space, you're always going to get a bit of flack for recommending one thing or the other, and oh, you're a shill, or you're just a fanboy, and blah blah blah. What about this? And we always just end up pointing at, like, look, here's the data.
Yep.
We're not paid. We're not paid by Intel or AMD or anything like that. To promote these things, it's always data. And
it's an interesting position to be in, because you're right, that dynamic comes up with some parts of the conversation, but there's so many factors to consider. I see in the comments, actually, one of the things somebody says about Thunderbolt support. That's one of the many topics that kind of comes up when we're talking to people about AMD versus Intel. Now, there are some boards out there right now, one that we carry that has built-in Thunderbolt support on the AMD side. And so a lot of times, if people are looking for kind of that mix of best CPU performance but still need Thunderbolt, there is an option out there. That's one of the many conversations that sort of comes up, but we're never going to beat, like, that's the thing, is like, people get mad about it, but it's funny that they're getting mad because it's like us being true to that in terms of like recommending AMD. It's not because we're being shills for AMD, it's because we're not being shills for Intel, I guess you could say. Like, and we're not going to be shills for AMD either. It's a matter of, like you said, collecting that data, trying to give the best information to the customer in terms of not only the performance, but like the long-term reliability. That's another metric that people might not realize we track. Like, we really try and pay close attention to failure rates over time whenever we put or introduce a new product into our lineup, or even beforehand, we try and get data on that and try and figure out. That goes into decisions about like which motherboard manufacturers we're going to choose to carry from like historical experience we've had with those manufacturers in the past. How well they tend to respond to us whenever we have issues that crop up and things like that. And so it's a lot to think about, and like trying to take all that information and like parse it to a customer's needs and trying to like allay their fears, whatever they happen to be, or suit them best, can be a tricky sort of thing. But at the core of it, like we're just taking all of this data that we have and trying to aggregate it in the most helpful way possible without consideration to like hurting somebody's feelings, basically, and like, hurting a company's feelings, I guess, in terms of us having more AMD sales versus Intel sales. Like, we're first and foremost, we're going to take care of our customers and make sure that they're not spending more money where they don't need to, or that there's like some similar cost option that's going to get them 20% better performance in whatever their workflow is. That's a no-brainer. Like, we're not gonna do somebody dirty like that.
Right. I like that because sometimes you'll see other companies will just jump on the newest thing, right? They're selling the newest thing just because it's new. And I know for a fact that we catch not flack necessarily, but there's always questions of like, hey, when are you going to start carrying this brand new thing? Why is it taking so long? And it just reinforces the fact that we drive so hard to provide the best product that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, it comes up all the time. We've got a perfect example of one that happened recently with Threadripper Pro. We had the number of inquiries we had whenever that
took a bit.
announced. It took quite a while for us to get, and honestly, it was just, I mean, with supply conditions being the way that they are right now, it was challenging to get our hands on enough where we could justify turning that switch and saying, yes, we can sell this now. Because if we do that too early, we're going to have a lot of customers angry because it's like we decided to sell it and list it on the website, and like 2 motherboards later we can't sell it anymore because we don't have enough supply. And so that's one of the things. But another one, like you're saying, is all the testing that we have to do to make sure, like, okay, somebody's going to be spending an extra, in some cases, couple $1,000s to go with Threadripper Pro versus just the normal Threadripper or even a Ryzen option. And how much does that make sense? Look at what they're primarily doing, and like, does it even make sense to spend that money? Are you getting enough of a gain there? With the Threadripper Pro specifically, it a lot of times comes down to people who are memory bound, because the memory support on Threadripper Pro is a lot more than other AMD systems we've had in our product line before.
Right.
So memory support, and then having more memory channels is a big thing. And then honestly, a lot of us are really excited about the Threadripper Pro because is as expensive as it is and unnecessary for a lot of people. To be quite frank, it is a beast of a machine. I don't know if this is super common knowledge, but a lot of systems, especially in the consumer space, will have these little trade-offs that happen on the board somewhere. So if you enable this M.2 port, then this PCIe port gets disabled, or this port only runs at Gen 3 speeds, whereas the rest of them run at Gen 4 speeds. Like, there's all these little things that have to kind of be trade-offs because of the power of they're trying to keep the chipset power under control, and they're trying to manage the resources that the CPU has to give to different areas and things like that. And so there's all these trade-offs that have to be made. And so it's always kind of exciting when you have a product that comes through where there's like no compromises. And that's exactly what Threadripper Pro is. Like, if somebody's just excited to have a system where they don't ever have to think about, like, okay, if I do this, does it disable that or whatever, like all these little isms, like every single PCIe slot, every single M.2 slot on that thing works. It's got built-in 10G networking. Like, it's a beast. So, anyway.
No, I think that's great. I feel it's a weird space, because you would think, okay, Threadripper kind of tends to be the HEDT sort of offer, which would kind of compete with the Core X for Intel.
Yes.
But man, that Threadripper is like a weird sort of in between. It's like HEDT, but almost
plus
Epic. I mean, it really is just kind of a Epic Light almost.
Yeah, exactly. And that's my understanding of the product, is basically they took their Epic and just dialed it. They're not even dialed it back per se, but then they took their Epic chipset and then put it onto more of a consumer branded thing. They gave it Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built in, for example, and had onboard like does it have onboard display plugins? I don't actually even know. Anyway, those are more of the consumer focused things rather than having the features that are going to be more server kind of focused, and that's where it lands. So it's kind of in its own, almost sort of in its own space right now, where it's halfway in between that HEDT space and that server grade sort of area. But it makes it so awesome.
It's really cool. I'm super proud of and happy that AMD's kind of on the top of the hill these days. I think that's super cool. Yeah, it's good. Like you said, competition's good for everybody. So
absolutely, yeah.
And
I'm sure Intel will be back with a swing of their own, and that's a good thing.
I hope it swings back and forth.
Exactly.
Honestly, I really do have fingers crossed for Intel to kind of come back. They have some new leadership going on. They're making some pivots and some changes here that I'm really excited to see kind of pay off for them. I think.
What about NVIDIA CPUs? When do you think we're going to see those?
Well, not to go too down a rabbit hole or anything. The acquisition, they're trying real hard to do ARM, and with Apple and the M1, M2 stuff coming out, and how well that's working out for them. I feel like the industry, computing, PCs, and computing in general is poised to make a very massive shift.
Yeah.
In that
with
way.
the big chip, little chip sort of thing going on right now. Big die, little die, I guess. On the processors, where basically that's the same thing that's been happening on tablets and mobile for a long time, and they're starting to. It looks like the companies that are making CPUs are starting to think about introducing that to desktop as well, which will be interesting to see where that takes us.
I think that'll be cool. I think actually that'll be a good place to wrap things up. We are just a little bit over our hour. Is there anything else you'd like to mention or talk about or shout out or anything?
I think I got my say in. Yeah. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. I appreciate it. I kind of shout this out to a couple people on social and everything. So hopefully I'll get some of my friends who tell me they tuned in for a few minutes. But
that'd be neat. Well, awesome. Well, yeah. So thanks, DJ, taking time out of your busy day, as we find out that you're quite the busy man. So I appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to join us and give us a little insight into what you do and you as a person and all that. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's
right on.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so cool. I'd also like to thank the audience as well for joining us today. We do this every Friday, 1 p.m. Pacific. And we do this sort of thing where it's, sometimes we'll have internal experts like DJ or our support team, and then labs, of course, as well, Matt and Don and all those guys. And then also we sprinkle in, some external experts, clients and other people who are just experts in their industry to kind of give you, as the audience and our customers and people interested, a little peek behind the curtain into things. And so thank you all for joining us as well today. Do mark your calendars, 1 p.m. Pacific every Friday, most Fridays actually, because sometimes I'm not available. So most Fridays, 1 p.m. Pacific, mark your calendars. We'll see you all next time. Thank you very much. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Bye.